Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling something I think we can all relate to, procrastination. You know, that thing where we put stuff off even though we know we probably shouldn't. And you've actually shared some really interesting research on the psychology of why we do this. And, well, I'm really excited to get into it.
Yeah, me too. Procrastination is often just dismissed as being lazy, right? But
Yeah.
it's actually way more complex than that. It's this like fascinating mix of brain activity, our emotions, even how we see time.
Yeah, totally. So let's get started with like the science behind it all,
Right.
the actual science of procrastination. Your research mentions the prefrontal cortex, right?
Yep.
And limbic system. Can you break down how those parts of the brain lead to us to this I'll do it later thing?
Sure. So the prefrontal cortex is kind of like the brain's, executive center. It's what helps with decision making, planning, impulse control, basically all that stuff we need to like stay focused and get things done. But there's another part of the brain called the limbic system, and it's all about processing emotions. And, when we have a task and it triggers these negative emotions like stress, anxiety, that fear of failing, the limbic system can kind of override the prefrontal cortex, like all its good intentions.
So like this like battle between logic and emotion going on in our brains, and sometimes emotion just wins.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just willpower.
Yeah.
There are these like actual things happening in our brains, neurological processes that make us procrastinate. What's interesting is that newer research has shown that other parts of the brain are involved too, like the amygdala, that's all about like fear and anxiety, and the striatum, which is tied to rewards and motivation.
Okay, so the more we know about our brains,
Hmm.
how they work, the better we can come up with ways to actually overcome, those procrastination patterns.
Right.
Now, your research also talks about these psychological traps that can make us procrastinate. One that really caught my eye was this I'll do it later illusion. It's also called time discounting bias, right? Can you talk a little more about
Oh,
that?
for sure. Time discounting bias basically means our brains like value rewards we can get right now more than rewards we'll get in the future. Even if we know logically that doing something now will be better for us later, we just get pulled in by wanting that instant gratification.
Yeah.
And so we tell ourselves, oh, I'll be way more motivated later. But, as we all know, later ends up feeling a lot like
Yeah, no,
now.
I think we've all been there at some point. Your research actually mentioned some studies about this. Can you share some findings that really show how bad we are at predicting our future motivation?
Definitely. Like one study showed that students were way more likely to say they'd go to the gym next week versus going this week, even though they didn't actually go to the gym more often next week.
Wow.
Another one found that people would pay more for something they could get right away compared to that same thing, but just a few days later, even if waiting meant saving a good chunk of money.
So our brains are kind of hardwired to go for that immediate reward.
Yeah.
But what are some of the other like psychological traps that lead to procrastination? Your research mentions fear of failure, then there's decision paralysis, that instant gratification overload we talked about, and also a lack of clear goals. Let's dive into those, right?
Totally. Fear of failure, which is like super tied to perfectionism, that can be a big one. We put off starting because we're so scared of not being perfect, but then that makes it even more likely we won't do it at all.
So the fear of not being perfect kind of becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, exactly. And then, today we're always slammed with choices, right? If we're not clear on what's really important or just feel overwhelmed by all the options, it can lead to like analysis paralysis. We spend way more time thinking about doing stuff than actually doing it. And that's like procrastination central.
Ah, so true. I think everyone's been there staring at their to-do list and just feeling frozen, like totally stuck with all those tasks, just like staring back at you.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, of course, there's the constant pull of instant gratification, especially with all the digital stuff around us.
Right, totally. Like our phones and social media and all the streaming services, they're always throwing those little dopamine hits at us. It's like they're hijacking our brain's reward system,
Yeah.
which makes it even harder to resist putting things off, and focus
Right.
on stuff that doesn't give us that immediate reward.
It really is like this constant battle between our long-term goals and wanting to feel good right now.
Hmm.
How does not having clear goals play into procrastination?
Well, if our goals are vague, like just clean the house or work on my business plan, they can feel really daunting, right? They can feel overwhelming. And when we don't have specific steps, actions we can take, our brains are like, nope, not doing that. So it's way easier to procrastinate when we don't really know what needs to be done.
It's like trying to go through a maze, but you don't have a map or anything.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the science of how our brains work, and some of the mental traps that make us procrastinate. But the big question is, like, how do we actually beat this procrastination monster? What are some things we can do that are actually backed up by research that can help us break free and start getting things done?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. There are some really simple but powerful techniques that can help us, retrain our brains, get our productivity back. You mentioned the 5-minute rule in your research. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that one.
Yeah. Well, the 5-minute rule has always seemed kind of interesting to me because it's it seems almost too easy. Like, is it really just telling yourself, okay, I'm just going to work on this for 5 minutes and then, like, magically you want to keep going?
Well, it might sound too good to be true, but there's actually good psychology behind it. It works because it makes it easier to start. Instead of facing this huge, scary task, you're basically tricking your brain into getting going.
It's like dipping your toes in the water instead of doing like, yeah, a cannonball into the deep end.
Exactly. And a lot of times, once you get over that initial resistance, you just keep going past the 5 minutes because you've already started, your brain's engaged, and the task doesn't seem so scary anymore.
So it's a way to kind of outsmart our own procrastination by making the starting point feel easier.
Right. And what about those times when we have a really big project? Like even 5 minutes makes your brain freak out.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That's when breaking tasks down into what I call micro goals can really help. Instead of one big scary task, you make smaller steps that are easier to handle. This makes the whole project less overwhelming, and you get that feeling of accomplishment as you check those smaller goals off your list.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So instead of stressing about a 10-page paper, I could break it down into like micro goals. Like write the introduction, research 3 articles, make it outline and stuff like that.
Exactly. And each time you finish one of those micro goals, you get a little dopamine hit, which makes you feel good about your progress and keeps you going. It's much better than trying to do the whole huge thing at once.
Yeah, I'm starting to get this.
Yeah.
So we've got the 5-minute rule and breaking things down into micro goals. Any other tricks we can add to our like anti-procrastination toolbox? I know your research mentioned something called the Pomodoro Technique, which I've heard of but never really understood. Can you explain that one?
Sure. The Pomodoro Technique is all about using a timer to break up your work time. Usually it's like 25 minutes of work, then a short break. The idea is to focus really hard during those 25 minutes and then give yourself a little break so you don't get burned out.
So you're basically giving yourself permission to take breaks, which actually makes you more productive.
Exactly. The Pomodoro Technique stops you from getting mentally exhausted
Mm.
because you have those breaks built in. And it's surprisingly good for fighting procrastination because those short bursts of focused work don't seem as scary as working on something for hours straight.
Oh, I like that. But what about those pesky distractions, those digital distractions that are everywhere nowadays? They're like procrastination magnets. How do we deal with those?
Well, that's where a dopamine detox comes in. The idea is to cut down on things that give you those quick dopamine hits like social media, video games, even email notifications.
Oh, yeah.
It can help reset your brain's reward system so you can focus better on tasks that don't have that immediate gratification.
So we're basically retraining our brains to enjoy finishing tasks rather than constantly chasing the next, like, notification or something.
Exactly. It might feel weird at first, but the benefits are totally worth it in the long run. When you're not getting hit with dopamine all the time, you start to appreciate the feeling you get from doing meaningful work and actually accomplishing something.
This is all really great stuff. But with all this talk about being productive and beating procrastination, it's also important to, like, remember to be kind to ourselves. You know, your research talks about how important it is to be kind to ourselves even when we mess up or don't reach our goals. Could you talk more about that?
Absolutely. Studies show that being self-critical and talking down to yourself actually makes procrastination worse. When we beat ourselves up for not being productive enough, we just get stuck in a cycle of shame and avoidance, and that makes it even harder to get back on track.
So it's not about ignoring our procrastination, but approaching it with understanding and wanting to make positive changes.
Yeah, exactly. Self-compassion means recognizing our struggles without judgment and treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding we would offer a friend going through a tough time.
Great. That makes a lot of sense. So it's about moving from blaming ourselves to supporting ourselves.
Mm.
Is there like one more strategy you want to highlight for tackling procrastination before we move on?
Yeah, one last technique I want to mention is using something called implementation intentions. Instead of having vague goals like I'll exercise more, you make super specific plans that say exactly when, where, and how you'll do it.
Oh,
So instead of just saying, I'll go for a run later, you'd say, I'll go for a 30-minute run at 6:00 p.m. in the park.
got it.
By adding those details, you make it way more likely you'll actually do it. You're taking the decision making out of it, which can be a big roadblock for a lot of people.
So it's like putting our good intentions on autopilot. I love that. Now, there's a part of me that wonders about those people who actually seem to do well under pressure, those last-minute miracle workers who somehow manage to pull everything together right at the deadline.
Mhm.
Is there something different about how their brains work, or are they just procrastination masters?
That's a great question, and it actually ties into this cool psychological concept called the Yerkes-Dodson law. It basically says that there's this sweet spot when it comes to stress and how well we perform.
So a little bit of pressure can actually be a good thing. Like maybe we actually need that deadline looming over us to get our brains working.
Right. Think about an athlete getting ready for a big game. Some stress can help them focus and perform their best, but if it gets too intense, they might get anxious and actually do worse. So the key is to find that balance where stress helps you instead of hurting you.
That makes sense. But doesn't relying on last-minute work all the time lead to burnout? How do we find that balance between using pressure to our advantage and not stressing ourselves out too much?
Well, that's a fantastic question. And it's actually one that we're going to dive into a lot deeper when we come back for part two of our exploration.
Okay, I can't wait. It feels like we've only just started to uncover all this stuff about this really complex and interesting topic. So, for now, dear listeners, stay tuned and we'll be right back to discover even more about the world of procrastination. Welcome back to our deep dive into procrastination.
You know, it's funny, before the break, we were talking about that Yerkes-Dodson law and how
Yeah.
some people really seem to thrive under pressure. It almost doesn't make sense, but you were saying that a little stress can actually help us perform better.
Right, exactly. The Yerkes-Dodson law shows that there's this perfect amount of stress that can make us do our best work. Think of it like a bell curve, right? If we have too little stress, we might not even get started. But then if we have way too much stress, we get totally overwhelmed and we end up doing worse.
Right.
But somewhere in the middle, like at that just right level of what we call arousal, that's when our focus gets sharp, our creative juices start flowing, and we can really hit our stride. So it's not about getting rid of stress completely, but more like using it to our advantage.
Exactly. The trick is knowing how we each respond to stress. Some people just naturally find that sweet spot, while others have to be more deliberate about creating the right amount of pressure for themselves.
Yeah, makes sense. It's all about figuring out what works best for you. Okay, so before the break, you mentioned that relying on that last-minute work can actually burn us out. So how do
Right.
we find that balance between using pressure as motivation but not getting chronically stressed out?
That's the big question, isn't it? And there are a couple things we can do to walk that line. One thing is to set deadlines for ourselves, artificial ones. If you know you tend to put things off, break a big project into smaller chunks and give yourself deadlines for each part.
Oh, yeah.
This creates that sense of urgency, but without letting the pressure build up until it's overwhelming.
So it's like create like mini pressure cookers along the way, but in a way that you can actually handle.
Yeah, exactly. Another good technique is to go public with your work. Tell a friend, a coworker, or even post about your goals on social media. Having other people know can be a surprisingly strong motivator.
It's like having your own personal cheering squad plus, a little nudge to keep you going. I like that. But what about those times when procrastination just totally wins? Those times when we feel stuck, just staring at our computer and even thinking about starting makes us feel overwhelmed. Got any advice for breaking out of that procrastination paralysis?
Oh, we've all been there. And sometimes, honestly, the easiest thing is the best thing. Try switching up your environment. If you're stuck at your desk, go to another room, work outside, even head to a coffee shop for a change of scenery.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Sometimes just getting out of that same old space can really get your mind working again.
Totally. And a change of environment often means a change in who you're around too, right? And that can really help when you're stuck.
You mean like reaching out to a coworker, a friend, or a mentor for support? Or just
Yeah.
to bounce ideas around?
Exactly. Talking about your challenges with someone else can often help you see things in a new way and maybe come up with solutions you hadn't thought of before. Plus, it's nice to feel connected, right? It can give you a boost of motivation.
So it's like having a sounding board and a cheerleader all rolled into one.
Hmm.
Okay, so we've talked about setting deadlines for ourselves, letting others know about our goals, and switching up our environment to break free. Anything else you would recommend?
Here's one that might sound a little weird. Reward yourself for making progress, not just for finishing. We tend to focus on the big reward at the very end, right? But that can make the whole process feel really long and tough. Instead, try celebrating the smaller wins along the way.
So, like, if I'm working on a big writing project, instead of waiting to celebrate until the whole thing is done, I might reward myself after each chapter or even each section.
Right, exactly. It could be as simple as taking a break to enjoy your favorite drink, listening to a podcast, or going for a quick walk. Those little rewards help keep you motivated and make the whole journey less intimidating.
It's like giving ourselves those little dopamine hits along the way to keep the momentum going. Now, before we wrap up this part of our discussion, there's one piece of the procrastination puzzle we haven't really talked about yet, and that's technology. I mean, it seems like our devices can be both our best friends and our worst enemies when it comes to actually getting things done.
You're so right. Technology really is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it gives us all these amazing tools to get organized, streamline our work, and connect with people. But then on the other hand, it's a constant stream of distractions that can mess up even the best laid plans. And that's something we're definitely going to explore when we come back for the final part of our deep dive.
Oh, I can't wait to get into that. It feels like we've only just scratched the surface of this whole procrastination thing. So until then, dear listeners, stay tuned and we'll be back soon to unlock even more secrets about the world of procrastination. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the world of procrastination. You know, it feels like we've uncovered so much already, like the whole brain science behind it, those sneaky psychological traps and, all those strategies to break free. But before we wrap up, we really need to talk about technology and its role in all of this.
Yeah, technology is a really interesting part of this whole procrastination thing. It's this powerful tool that can either make us more productive or completely derail us depending on how we use it.
It really is. It's like having this supercomputer in our pocket,
Yeah.
Can help us get so much done, or it can send us down these endless rabbit holes of distraction. So how do we use technology for good?
Right.
How do we stop it from becoming this procrastination enabler? What did you find in the research?
Well, one of the most important things is to become more mindful of our tech habits. We need to pay attention to how and when we're using technology and ask ourselves, is this actually helping me or is it just distracting me from the things I should be doing?
Right, instead of mindlessly scrolling through social media whenever we have a free minute, we should maybe stop and ask, is this really how I want to be spending my time? Is this helping me reach my goals?
Exactly. It's about recognizing those automatic behaviors and making choices about how we're interacting with technology. Think of it like a technology diet, sort of like a healthy eating plan. We need to be careful about what we consume digitally,
Yeah.
right? And make sure it's actually good for us, like feeding our minds and supporting our goals, not just draining our energy and making it hard to focus.
I love that, a technology diet. It's true. It's so easy to fall into those mindless scrolling habits. But being more aware of our digital intake is a great place to start. But beyond just being mindful, are there ways we can actually use technology to, help us beat procrastination?
Oh, absolutely. There are tons of apps and programs specifically designed to keep us focused and organized and on track. You've got time tracking apps that show you how you're spending your time, task management apps that break big projects down into smaller steps, even website blockers that stop you from going to those time-wasting websites we all know and love.
It's like having this whole team of digital assistants right there in our pocket. But, there's so many options out there. It can be overwhelming to figure out where to even start. Do you have any recommendations for those of us who are feeling a bit lost in the app world?
I think a great place to start is figuring out what your biggest procrastination triggers are. Are you always getting distracted by social media? You could try a website blocker or an app that limits your social media time. Do you have trouble staying organized and prioritizing tasks? There are task management apps that let you make to-do lists, set deadlines, and track your progress. If notifications are your downfall, you can adjust your settings to cut down on interruptions.
So it's about picking the tools that actually help us with our specific problems and fit into how we work, right? It's not about using every app out there. It's about finding the ones that actually make us more productive and help us stay focused.
Exactly. It's all about using technology strategically. And, even beyond the specific apps and programs, we should think about our whole digital environment. Just like our physical workspace can affect how well we focus and how motivated we feel, our digital workspace can too.
You mean is our computer desktop cluttered? Are our files organized? Do we have a calming background image?
Yeah, all of that. Decluttering our desktops, organizing our files, even having calming desktop backgrounds can make a huge difference. It's about creating a digital space that feels calm and inviting, not chaotic and overwhelming.
It's like giving our digital lives a Marie Kondo makeover.
Yeah.
Out with the digital clutter, in with peace and order. I love it. But, even with all the best tech tools and a perfectly organized digital world, there's still one really important thing we need: the right mindset.
You're so right. Technology can be a powerful tool, but it's not going to magically solve all our problems. In the end, overcoming procrastination is about developing a growth mindset, being okay with challenges, and having self-compassion.
So it's not about beating ourselves up for every time we slip up. It's about seeing those moments as opportunities to learn and grow.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. We need to remember that we're all human and we all procrastinate sometimes. The key is to understand why we do it, find strategies that work for us, and just keep moving forward,
Yeah.
one step at a time.
Wow. This deep dive into procrastination has been really eye-opening. We've explored how our brains work, busted some myths, uncovered those psychological traps, and we even have this whole toolkit of strategies to fight procrastination, both in the real world and the digital world. But as we wrap up, I'm curious, knowing everything we've talked about today, what's one small step you can take right now to break free from procrastination and start moving closer to your goals?
That's a great question to think about, and I encourage everyone listening to take a moment to reflect on that too. Remember, even the tiniest step in the right direction can make a big difference. So start small, be kind to yourself, and celebrate every bit of progress you make.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. Until next time, stay curious, stay motivated, and keep diving deep.